Mr. Speaker, may I offer perhaps rare congratulations to the Minister on several points. The first is that by being willing to embrace changes from the Select Committee, I believe that the Minister and the Chair, now the Honourable Todd McClay, have assisted Parliament to get to the point where we have a piece of legislation which is workable and does make useful amendments to our structure of government, and the Labour opposition will now be able to support this bill, which is a change from where we were in the first reading, where we were opposing it at that stage. So this is a significant shift for the Labour opposition. It reflects have been made in the Select Committee process, and I will comment now on those most major changes which have allowed us to switch our position. Secondarily, Mr. Speaker, would like to compliment the Minister on choosing the right speech to read. Hasn't always been thus, but we're very pleased that all in jest, Minister. Come on, have a thick skin. You've been here a couple of years. Mr. Speaker, this bill is for the public one of those interesting pieces of legislation which might not seem particularly flashy, but actually goes to the heart of how we run our institutions of government, the rules under which government departments and public entities are operated and how they are accounted for, and the rules by which they employ their staff. And Mr. Speaker, in the first version of this bill as introduced, which we opposed, there were a number of provisions which would have violated the existing rights of public servants in the stampede to create more flexibility in the state sector. For example, with regard to the redundancy rights of public servants in clauses 49, 61A and 61B, as introduced, the new sections would have removed provisions for the transfer of employees between public service departments and unduly restricted redundancy payments where state sector employees who've received a redundancy notice are offered and have accepted an alternative position prior to ceasing their employment. The effect of the provision, sir, would have been to remove the existing rights contained in collective agreements and would have ignored the fact that the State Sector Act actually established government agencies as separate employing organisations. The effect of that would be, sir, that state servants would have lost existing entitlements by being forced to transfer without access to redundancy payments, where in fact there was a significant difference in their terms and conditions of employment. Sir, the change made by the Select Committee has been to enshrine the principle that for redundancy payments not to be paid, the new job offer has to be, and I quote, no less favourable than the existing position. And the Select Committee considered but rejected ultimately an alternative formulation proposed by the government, which was, quote, no less favourable overall, close quote, and instead took advice which said it is already the case law that courts can see the package of provisions and entitlements as they currently stand and can make judgments about equivalence. We didn't need that word overall, which would have been taken as an undue liberalisation. The government compromised on that key point to the satisfaction of the public sector unions, the Public Service Association, which led that debate, and the Council of Trade Unions. And, sir, on that basis, the Labour opposition is now willing to support that provision. Sir, the committee's amendments to the transition arrangements in section 61A included the insertion of a new 3-year sunset clause following the enactment of the bill, which will ensure that collective and individual agreements are treated equally. Now, that was really important to state sector employees and their representatives, because otherwise individual agreements could have lasted longer than a collective agreement, putting state sector employees who were on a collective at a disadvantage relative to their colleagues on individual agreements. And, sir, I'm very pleased that the government has seen sense on that matter and introduced a new 3-year sunset provision, which means everybody's treated equally, as you might say people should have been from the start. So the committee was concerned, the Labor opposition was very concerned about the proposed government workforce policy orders by which the Crown would have sought to tie the hands in a binding fashion of state entities involved, for example, in wage bargaining, and has amended those provisions so that they're now government workforce policy statements, not orders, that they're not binding at the level of the detail, and specifically reinforce the point that none of the existing bargaining rights of state servants will be trammelled by this. That is, all of the existing legal rights of state sector employees to good faith negotiation have been preserved. Speaker, other improvements made by the committee include tidying up the conflict of interest provisions. These have been strengthened where there are delegated powers, and the application of the Ombudsman's Act has been clarified. So improvements have been made to the provisions for strategic intentions as embodied in the formal statements of intent. The original bill would have diluted the statement of intent process so that they were only written for ministers once every 3 years, often when they were green as grass at the start of a triennium, where you might say Sir Humphrey could be hard at work, and has prevented that being diluted to a once in 3 year, they're currently annual, to give ministers the right to have an SOI updated every year and to make it mandatory for state servants to brief the ministers that they have that right. Mr. Speaker, Section 55B2 has been amended to balance the efficiency objectives with a broader notion of effectiveness that includes fairness considerations of both a substantive and procedural notion. And those are some of the key changes, and I acknowledge that they are significant changes for a government to make, and we really wish to commend the work of the committee chair, Todd McClay, and the minister who's resumed his seat, the one without much of a sense of humour earlier, Mr. Speaker, because they've been willing to make these changes in good faith such that the bill can now command the broad support of the House. And for members of the public watching, it's not actually every day that you see Parliament working in a cooperative fashion at select committee level, resulting in significant redrafting of bills like this. Sometimes they can be intransigent, as my colleague Mr. Little has said, but in this case there was good cooperation across the House, and that has captured the imagination of the often slumbering Maurice Williamson, who has come back to consciousness, particularly to contribute to this debate, and we're very honoured by the fact that he's woken up and tossed in a very small barb or two, Mr. Speaker. So no process is perfect, sir, but in general this one's been pretty good. Having said that, and in my final minute or two, may I note some remaining reservations which the Labor Party has, which are not significant enough in our eyes or those of the state sector unions to prevent support for the bill, but upon which we will be giving close ongoing monitoring, and they are these, or include these, that in respect of the redundancy provisions, there are still concerns that the protections only relate to the public service, that someone who accepts another job during a notice period now has greater protection in maintaining continuity of service, and that the position must start on before or immediately after the date upon which the current employment ends. We're also concerned that the delegation of powers from the core state sector to non-state partners and implementing agents is too broad, and we will be watching very closely to see how that is used in practice and whether later amendment is required. We're concerned that immunity from suit rather than indemnity is being afforded. We think that that's a bit broad, and we note the Law Commission's concerns in that regard. The amendments to the Public Finance Act that will assist in removing barriers to greater cooperation between public service entities need to be balanced in practice with greater clarity of financial accountability documents, and we did receive assurances, sir, from officials and the Minister that there would always be possible in the budget documents to achieve complete traceability of output classes, even where there is a multi-category appropriation. Mr. Speaker, to sum up, the committee has made significant progress. We commend the government for being able to listen to the opposition to the state sector unions and actually to forge bipartisan compromise on a structural piece of legislation that will most likely be around for a political generation or two.
Paul Goldsmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My pleasure to speak on this